Um, oh, two people in the waiting room. Forgot to let Marilyn, Margot and Kim in. There we go. Excellent. All right. So that's just your up to, your current events and up to date kind of stuff with the congregation. Oh, I can give you a bit of good news since, you want you come here to get the inside scoop. With our little appeal that we did at the end of the year, that email that went out, it looks like we're gonna just about finish even. So people did step up, so thank you if you were able to do that and did do some of that. It was looking like we were anywhere between 10 to 20, it's hard to, because you don't have all the bills and you don't have all this stuff. But we are definitely looking about coming in negative again this year, and it looks like we may have just creaked into the black a little bit or somewhere around even. So we'll know more by tomorrow, and then we'll get that in the Beacon the next Sunday. But anyway, so thank you for that, and that was something to celebrate for sure. All right, so we are ready for Exodus. We have finished Genesis, and now we pick right up with Exodus. Genesis and Exodus kind of work as a unified, well, the whole Bible is a unified story that leads to Christ. But, it reads almost like a novel, so now we pick up. And so it made sense for us to do this, and it's been many years since we looked at Exodus. So I'm excited to do that with you. I put up I've got a few quotes for you as introductory comments about the book of Exodus. And then we'll just get right into reading and jump in. Sound good? All right, let's pray. Gracious and loving God, thank you for this opportunity to be in your word together. May this time be fruitful and helpful for us. We are broken people. We all are in need of liberation from sin and brokenness. And so we pray as we embark on this story of your redemption of your people and the continuing of the promise, that we can take comfort to know we are part of the story. And the redemption you brought is our redemption as well. So give us your spirit as we have good conversation in your word today. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, let me get to our text here. Well, actually, I'll get to our PowerPoint here. Put that up there. All right, I'll have to do it up here. Slideshow. From the beginning. There we go. All right, and it went away. I know it went away. Duplicate show. It'll come back. And I forgot to like that up. Okay, there we go. So folks at home can see this as well. Let me hide. I hide loading meeting controls. There we go. So there's a lot of questions around the story of Exodus. A lot of people have questions about the entire historicity of the Old Testament. If you didn't know that, what I call the hyper or real critical scholars, they even wonder about King David. We haven't found any proof externally that King David existed. How do we know that wasn't made up to, shore up this new nation, etc.? Very serious scholars are very serious about this. However, by the way, on King David, there is a little piece of archaeological find that talks about the house of David that goes back to about 200 years after David would have lived. So there is that. If you need external proof, there's a reference to the house of David. But that certainly is true as we go back further into the Exodus, and even you go back into Genesis. But But when you get to Exodus, this event of the people being enslaved in Egypt, the story of Moses, the story of them being taken out of slavery is crucial. And so Terence Fredheim, one of our Lutheran scholars, has written, along with someone else, a commentary on Exodus, and I'll be referring to that and looking at that. Not uncritically, of course, but he brings this subject up in his introduction to Exodus, and he makes this point about the historicity of this event, and I think it's a helpful one, so I want to read from that. It would appear that such events are so specified, i.e. like the Exodus, so I'm just giving you a snippet here, so giving you the context. He's talking about, well, some events in the Bible, maybe we don't have to hold on to them, like Jonah and the whale. I remember when Missouri Synod broke up back in 1970, and they kicked out 90% of their professors from their seminary over higher critical ways of looking at the Bible. That was one of the test questions. Was Jonah real or not? If you said no, you're out. So, in other words, everyone has to be true historically or none of it. Now, other people, and I guess I would put myself in this latter camp, feel like I'm not saying Jonah wasn't real, that story, that he actually wasn't swallowed by a whale. God can do it, whatever. But I don't hold on to that quite as tightly as I do this Exodus story. There are some, because they're so powerful and they're referred to over and over and over throughout all the Bible, the New Testament, the Old Testament. And so, a lot of people would say, well, how do you take one as historical and not others? Well, there's reasons, there's rationale for doing that. And I would just say, I'm going to bank on the historicity of this event. I'm going to hold some of the other events a little less tightly. Yeah, Ross.
But without the Passover, there's no Last Supper.
Right. Without the Passover, there's no Last Supper, and we go on and on, the whole card falls. So remember what the Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15. If Christ was not really raised from the dead, not spiritually, not as a hallucination in the people's minds, but physically raised from the dead, he says, we are of all people most to be pitied. And we are still in our sins, and we have no hope. So, would Paul say that about the Exodus? I think he would. And the rest of the Old Testament, this is where really the people of Israel become the people of Israel. They were the people of Israel, but this is really where they come together. In this story, and this liberation of, I know Lisa opened that, Karen, I don't know why, but anyway, that's fine. That this liberation of the people from slavery is just absolutely key. So let's go on with what Dr. Fredheim says here. Because they are considered constitutive of the community and hence important to faith, while other events are not given such significance. As a constitutive event, the Exodus is recognized as an event of such import that the community would not be what it is without it having occurred. I think that's well said. Here, let's keep going. The event so captured the imagination of Israel that it not only served to illuminate Israel's most basic identity, but also functioned as a prism, a way of interpreting all of Israel's subsequent history. So hundreds of years later, they looked at this event. You'll see this in the Psalms and Deuteronomy. God says, who am I? I'm the one that brought you out of slavery in Egypt. If today our comparison would be, who is God? The one who raised Jesus from the dead. The one who was in Christ Jesus, reconciling the world to himself. So this is helpful and important. A question often raised in this regard is, how important for faith is the happenedness of the reported events. To paraphrase the Apostle Paul, if the Exodus did not occur, was Israel's faith in vain? A few interpreters would make no distinctions among biblical events. The happenness of every event is crucial for faith, but most would say that certain biblical texts give us an inner biblical warrant to make distinctions among events. So he just said kind of what I said to you. Now, if you're a person that says, I just trust what the Bible says, and Jonah was swallowed by a whale, and that's fine, and there was Adam and Eve, and they're literal, thanks be to God, great. I'm with you, okay? If God can raise Jesus from the dead, he can do pretty much anything. So, but some people get hung up on some of this, like, was this historical, was this not? Well, Dr. Fredheim's point is that it's such a big deal, this event of the Exodus, that you gotta hold on to this. This happened. And so therefore, then we start asking questions about archaeology, and we go to Egypt, and we go to looking at their historical records, and people really dive into this. And if you want to have some fun, YouTube that. There's a guy, he has a YouTube channel, Inspiring Philosophy is what it's called. It's interesting, but and he does a thing on the Exodus, and it's quite well done, about when did the Exodus occur, and when, what was the date, and what evidence is there. And one of the things that people who really hold to the historicity, as I hope you will, and I do, is that when you look at the book of Exodus, and you're not going to notice this in English, but as you read it in Hebrew, you see all kinds of influence of Egyptian words. There's, that's an Egyptian word that was borrowed and brought in. Well, how would they do that if they weren't in Egypt? And then it disappears. That kind of influence disappears later. So it's clear that the narrative of Exodus and the Pentateuch was influenced by Egypt. Why? Well, they were there. And so there's lots of internal reasons to say, well, this was there. Now, is there external stuff? There is, let's see here. Let me go back to, I gotta unshare. Let's see, we'll come back to that in just a minute. I have to do a new share, and I wanna go back to this. All right, and then I wanna go over here to, that's the atlas, let's see, where is it? Right there it is. Yahoo! All right, this is called the Merneptah stele. This is a stone that has been found. It's an engraved stone. It describes the victories of the Egyptian pharaoh Merneptah over Libyan invaders. Various outlying groups of raiders band together to attack Egypt near the end of the 13th century. But Merneptah defeated them. All right, well, is there, what is up with that? Here's the text of that. The foreign chieftains lie prostrate, lying peace. Not one lifts his head among the 9 bows. Libya is captured while Hatti is pacified. Canaan is plundered. Ashkelon is carried off, and Gezer is captured. Yenoam is made into non-existence. Israel is wasted. Whoa! There is a before 1000 AD Egyptian historical record that mentions Israel. Did you know that? Look at that. So there is some external evidence. Now, most people put the time of Exodus, and let me get up a map here so you can see where this is all happening, in like the 1200s. There's some people that want to date the Exodus much earlier. I think Ramses II makes the most sense given what Exodus says. But then people come along and say, but wait, shouldn't Ramses II and all of his historical records have mentioned the Hebrews? Well, they do mention some people that, not by name as in Hebrews or Israelites, that were here and were enslaved. There is a mention of that, but nothing specific. But there's no mention of the plagues. There's no mention of their big defeat in the Red Sea. Should we be surprised about that?
Absolutely not.
Yeah,
First of all, it wasn't so Napoleon and Bizarro that we even begin to decipher some of the Egyptian hieroglyphs.
true.
How much history has been lost in
Right,
that time?
right. It's not like we've got everything that's ever been written.
But why would the pharaohs there talk about these beasts?
Right,
Most of the stuff they're talking about, praise them, praise the.
That's right.
And the truth, that's what, they did not have 27 news coverage back in those days,
don't we long to be back then? So, no, great point, Bob. If you, and we see this about the Egyptian writings, their propaganda to celebrate the god Pharaoh. You're not gonna put on there when the Pharaoh isn't gonna be okay with putting on when he got his tail whipped. No, so we're not surprised by them. So, and again, this is probably enough of this kind of historic, but I want to just as an introduction, give you some of the talk, some of the background of this event that I really believe this is key, that this was historical. And that it shaped all of the life of Israel, their entire history, and we will see as we read through Exodus how much is in the New Testament. Yes, please.
One more point to point out,
Please.
they recently, the last 5-10 years, found scrolls. Some of the people who built the pyramids, records, like you would an accountant would make.
Yeah,
And talk about salaries for the workers.
yes,
So there's a big controversy now where they pay workers or the slaves. It's
Yeah.
more and more looking like they were paid workers to build the pyramids.
it's possible, although at this historical time, if we go to the 12th century and Ramses II, there were, because Egypt generally did not, you're absolutely right. Egypt generally did not enslave people. They usually had really hard labor and people were paid. But there is references during this time period of a people that were enslaved in this time. But, so you're absolutely right.
You cannot consider that slavery like we had in the South there.
That's true of the New Testament, the Greek world and the Roman world too, for sure. So this is the land of Goshen that you're gonna hear about. This is the one reason that they, again, this is probably way too much in the weeds than what you wanna go. But the capital earlier on in Egypt was down further south. And you're gonna hear in Exodus that, Moses went back and forth like it was just a quick journey to the palace of the Pharaoh. Well, if this is where the people are enslaved and he has to travel 120 miles, it isn't a quick couple-hour walk, So, this is where the capital of Egypt was during that 11th century, 1200s time. And anyway, the land of Goshen, if you need me to pull it back so you can see Egypt, there's Egypt. So this is the area we're talking about. And yeah, helpful. Sharon, you were gonna chime in and then we'll get to read. Yeah.
Simply read some things and some back, oh gosh, a couple of years ago, and Albert Lee Nat Geo, where he took sonar
Yeah,
and went, and he found, the buildings leave that imprint forever.
yeah,
Though they're destroyed now, you would all, know, but they're there. And they found the exact buildings that the Hebrews were as slaves
Right.
built.
right.
And then they also know, or the Jewish people tend to look at that period from Joseph to the Exodus as a 300-year of forgetfulness, because they forgot about Joseph. The
Yes.
pharaohs didn't know any more about him, they didn't care.
Exactly.
And so, but the Jews have recorded so specifically that all the prophecies of old have come true.
Yeah, yeah, so. Yep, and that's, we get into the text, they're gonna say, the text says, a Pharaoh arose that had forgotten Joseph and all that he did for Egypt. And then the other problem is, well, we'll get there when we read it, so, no, good, excellent comment. Okay, please, let's read, okay, let's go. All right, folks at home, you can see the text or the map there, I hope, and now hopefully you can see the text. All right. Here we go. These are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob. Remember that Jacob got a new name, right? He's not usurper anymore, he's Israel. Who came to Egypt with Jacob, each with his household, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. How many of those are there? 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, and you throw on Joseph, I guess you've got you have 12 there anyway. In other words, the whole family was there. And all the descendants of Jacob were 70 persons. Joseph was already in Egypt. When Joseph died and all his brothers and all that generation, then Joseph died and all his brothers in that generation. So you got 70 there. They live, but they pass away there. But the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them.
So these are all the people that came because of the famine.
Correct. That's right. And what was you guys have read Genesis, what was one of the things that was in the covenant promise?
With will multiply.
Be fruitful and multiply, and your descendants are gonna be as the what? Sand on the shore, the stars of heaven, all of that. So, wow, look at that. It's happening.
They have the land.
And, well, the land, they're still holding on. They haven't got their land yet, have they? You know, that's gonna come later, but a lot of times people ask, well, how long was it? Well, let's keep reading. Now there arose a new king over Egypt, who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. This is roughly, like I mentioned, this reference historically to a group of people who, you know, lived as slaves in the land. It is roughly the concern. I think about, well, I won't go into modern history because I don't want to get messed up here. But, you know, it's an understandable, we got a bunch of foreigners living with us. They're gonna take over. You know, so the Pharaoh is doing what kings do, and the Pharaoh is concerned about power and control. He shouldn't be, you're right, Ally, but that's the way pharaohs work and kings work. God is in control. Ross?
Sounds like he's also concerned that the Israelites are gonna take over the plots.
But yeah, like they're gonna fight against us and escape from the land, you know, and they end up ironically doing that, don't they? So the Pharaoh had maybe in one sense, a realistic concern here. From a human worldly standpoint, power standpoint. And so he set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. They built for Pharaoh's store cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread abroad. And the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel. Now, we're gonna hear that the time that they were in slavery is how long? Anybody remember? 400 years. A lot of people say, well, where was God and all of that? Why did he wait so long? Well, he was multiplying the people. So we don't want to miss that. I mean, even though they were being oppressed, they were growing. So it wasn't as if God was completely absent. I mean, we can say, why did he take so long to liberate his people from slavery? We all have issues with God's sense of timing, but I know I do, but and I'm sure God chuckles, you know, if you only knew, Bill, you know, trust me, you know, but but nonetheless, we've got this time, the people keep multiplying and growing, and we got this conflict now arising with Pharaoh and their concern. It's a power issue. So they ruthlessly made the people to work as slaves and made their lives, and this is definitely the word for slaves, servant, toil, work, serve,
Forced labor.
forced labor, work as, is that what yours says? For, as forced labor, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I suppose that they might have gotten a small salary, or, I mean, they had subsistence, they had to eat.
And they multiply, you can't multiply, you have.
Yeah, you gotta have enough resources to survive and live. So they ruthlessly made the people work as slaves or push them into forced labor, made their lives bitter with hard service. This word here is desperate, bitter, bewilderment. So miserable with hard service in mortar and brick and in all kinds of work in the field. In all their work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves.
Pastor Bill?
Yes, please.
Yeah. It says.
And say it as loud as you can, Doug.
From the death of Joseph to the new king, and 200 years.
Okay,
So that Pharaoh that didn't know
yeah.
Joseph, that's 200 years later.
So it's easy to, it could be forgotten, yeah. Although, you know, you look at, we remember our history 200 years back, but this wasn't their finest day history. This is where they survived because a Canaanite, from their viewpoint, but a Hebrew, you know, saved them. That they might forget that. Yeah, so could be 200 years, yeah. Yeah, okay, excellent, thank you, Doug, yeah.
The Egyptians are looking at the Hebrews as low life.
Yes,
And maybe this is where the hatred toward Jews began.
right.
Because now you got, you know, it wouldn't necessarily spread so fast if it were small groups of people that other people
Yeah.
hated.
Yeah,
But now you've got this mass and it's gonna move and it's gonna create a lot of hatred up there.
yeah. I suppose you could go back to this event and see that there's opposition to God's people from the beginning. I think the animosity comes in the God's election. You know, so God chose this people and not us, you know? You know, it's just, but then you got that within God's people with the Joseph story, right? God chose Joseph and not us, you know, so it's part of human nature, I think.
Yeah.
That we, you know, we're gonna be jealous, we got our own turf, we got our own tribe, and we're gonna, you know, buckle in and defend our self-interest.
Prejudice.
And prejudice, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, which is, we see that all over humanity. I mean, we see our own struggles in this land with prejudice. We see, when I was in Ethiopia, they have like, I think they have a dozen different tribes that are now in the country of Ethiopia. And I wouldn't know the difference between that, but they do. They know who's a Romo and who's a Marek and who's this and who's that. So it's kind of part of the human nature. But throw on that God chose a particular group, that makes it a whole nother ballgame. So yeah, there's animosity right from the beginning. So, okay, so there's the setup. The new Pharaoh forgot all that Joseph had done. The Hebrew people are multiplying like crazy and becoming stronger, and now they're a threat. And now they are put into slavery. But that's not working, right? He enslaved them, but they even multiplied more under the oppression. All right, what is the Pharaoh gonna do now? Then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, when you serve as midwife to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, he shall live. I hope China's not doing this anymore, but they were doing it the opposite direction.
No, they changed,
They changed, good.
but the woman are the rebelling.
Yes, right, good, good. So we're gonna stop this multiplying. And the Pharaoh goes to the midwives. And we hear now about two of those midwives, two women. Interesting. Why did we hear about these two women? They seem to be no name, they are named, but just ordinary midwives. How is it that they enter the story now?
They're rebellious.
Well, they feared God.
They feared God. They're gonna be the heroes of the story.
We don't know Pharaoh's name, but we know.
We don't know Pharaoh's name, but we know their name. Isn't that powerful? Now, this is where we get into like, who wrote the Bible? We talked about that with Genesis. Does it come from multiple sources or whatever? But to me, as I start reading this, a woman was involved. Because just look at the humor. I don't think a man would have come up with this, but anyway, you decide, all right. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but let the male children live. Now, was that a risky proposition? Absolutely. Their lives are in the margins. Yeah, on the chopping. They were putting their lives at risk. But they didn't do it. They let the male children live. So these two in particular, but maybe other midwives, said, no, we're not going to do this thing. They feared God. So what did they know about God? They knew God was about life and that life was sacred. And they were not going to do this. So they enter now as the heroes. But now if you want to know why I think somehow, there's influence of women telling the story from the standpoint of a woman, let's keep reading. So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, why have you done this and let the male children live? In other words, you're going to get it. What do they say? Well, the midwives say to the Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them. I mean, they're out there working in the fields. Out comes the baby and we missed it. So God dealt well with the midwives. And the people multiplied and grew very strong. Now, what we're going to see is some more irony and humor that I think, from a woman's perspective, that I could see the women of Israel telling this story and just laughing with joy. Please, yeah,
Well, thinking about the family,
yeah,
back then, the husbands were not out of the picture with this.
right,
And because both husband and wife wanted those children,
yeah,
and they wanted the boys.
Sure.
The boys were very important. They
Yeah.
were considered leaders
yeah,
in many ways. And so when they see their sons being destroyed, they would be supporting their wives.
Absolutely.
And also, the pharaohs would know, had known by then, these people are not going with our gods.
You wonder what happened to these midwives. We're not told. We're just told that they were heroes. Because they stood up for life.
It says God gave them families.
Oh, okay, yes, right. And the people multiplied very strong, and because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, every son that is born of the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live. So now Pharaoh says to everybody, he puts the charge out to everybody. Can you imagine that as I'm an Egyptian, I'm supposed to do this? Can you imagine? Well, we've seen these horrible examples in history that people do get swept into this kind of horrible stuff. Yes.
So his plan was to have the Egyptian people intermarry with the Israeli women and absorb them that way, or?
I guess that if there's no male children, so Roth was wondering, how's the Pharaoh accomplishing this? Good question. I don't know if then he was hoping that the women would intermarry with the Egyptian men, or whether they just wouldn't have men to have kids with. I don't know. Yeah. Paul, yeah.
I was just gonna comment, this whole passage, this chapter is very compressed. Because if we think about when Moses came along, closer to the end of this 400 years,
Yeah,
it's probably a different king than the one in verse 8 that you're called for this. I don't think that king would have, well, I don't know, I'm
Yeah.
just wondering.
I don't know either. I get the sense as the story goes on, because, but yeah, how long were they putting the male children to death before we get to the birth of Moses is a good question. I never thought about that. Yeah.
Counting off the bill.
Please, Audrey, yeah.
Then the midwives, then I'm assuming that now they're Egyptians. At first I thought maybe they were Israelites.
I'm assuming they're Egyptian.
You know, I think so.
Yeah, I'm assuming the midwives are Egyptian.
But, you know.
The Hebrew midwives, okay.
Did
Yours says did mine say that? The midwives. It does. Okay. So it's interesting that he would command the Hebrew midwives, but that even makes them more heroic in one sense.
Well, they tell Pharaoh, these women are stronger than the Egyptian women.
Right.
Basically, so they're.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's why then I was thinking, well, maybe then they were Egyptian.
They said mine it's Hebrew.
I think mine did not mention that, but no, here it is, the Hebrew women, well, but the midwives, does it say the midwives? Verse 15, thank you. Then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, yeah, so they're Hebrews. I missed over that completely. I was kind of going where Audrey was. It made more sense to me that he would tell the Egyptian, but yeah, of course, they wouldn't have Egyptian midwives, they'd have Hebrew midwives. So the fact that the Hebrew midwives stood up to the Pharaoh, stood up to that amount of power, that's crazy.
It was against their, should they?
Well, correct, but other than that, he's gonna come and kill you, and because you didn't do what he said. That's kind of interesting. I've got Ian, I've got Kim, Audrey, whichever.
So you said the midwives under Shepherd.
Yes,
They've got this underground railroad communication.
yeah. And yes, Kim,
This stories in Genesis where Abraham found where they defeated people.
right?
during, you know, with Joshua and onward, there's gonna be lots of requests. So I just don't understand why these people were so passive, especially when the word says that they were strong, you know? Yeah, I know that God had told Abraham that they would be subject to years, but I don't know why they just sit there and say it.
Why didn't they revolt sooner? Wasn't God's plan, is what Ethel May responded to your good question, or, yeah?
I was just saying that earlier when when the Pharaoh was afraid that the Egyptians would join other countries, other tribes and fight them and then leave. I would think the Pharaoh would be concerned that they would fight them and then stay in the country and take over the country, not leave.
One or both and. There was clearly a threat. The Pharaoh is protecting his power and his people's power and his country's power. Other than that, the might of the Egyptian army and power was really powerful, and the people did not have weapons and did not have, you know, that they were facing certain destruction, you know. If they did rebel that way. But it is also, maybe that's good to hold on to, Kim, because is this story just about slaves being liberated from an oppressor? That's another question that arises with this book. Is that what this is about, or is there a bigger liberation involved that this is a part of? And so maybe that kind of surfaces with your wondering about that. Yeah, Kathy.
Well, I'm Egyptian treat the German treat the Jews.
Yeah,
It wasn't like seven. This is made it. This is like
right.
Able to do certain things, and it just as Egypt became a threat,
Yes.
it may have been kind of a process where we just to get to that point.
Yeah.
Slaves.
Yes, so it wasn't like overnight, they said, now you're slaves. It was gradual, and before they knew it, they had no way to fight against
That's what
this
we
kingdom.
get.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense to me as well. Bob and
Yeah.
Lori.
Take a bit of time after they leave Egypt. All of a sudden, they're a mighty army. How did they become a mighty army overnight? Training, weapons, and all that bit. You don't take a bunch of slaves and all say, okay, man, you're now a mighty army. Now, there's other philosophies saying that, yes, Egypt was concerned about the Jews there, but it's also protecting their borders. So they could have been part of the protection there, have certain military training to do that. Now he's starting to worry about, well, they're getting a little too strong. Maybe we don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah, right. That's a possible part of it as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
military, you know, back when you just don't get overnight a big.
Yeah, it's true, because we hear about them, you know, going forth and becoming although they didn't do very well in the wilderness, but anyway. Interesting, okay,
Egypt was, they had a professional army, they had chariots,
yes,
soldiers with spears and
Right.
archers and stuff, and they.
Yeah. Hebrews did not have that,
They didn't have it.
Yeah. or at least at this point, for
Yeah, I
sure.
don't know.
Yeah. Okay, Gloria, you were jumping in and then,
Well,
Yeah.
I think, I think that Pharaoh was really afraid of losing these people. Who was gonna do all this work that the Egyptians or the Hebrews were doing if they left?
right,
I mean, it was gonna put him in kind of a pickle.
absolutely. Hey, the unfortunate part of our history, you know, our country really was benefited economically by the slave trade and the cheap labor and all of that. And so the Pharaoh's like, hey, this is gonna work out perfectly. You know, I can get the pyramids and my cities built and whatever. Cause he has to keep the bottom line as well, so, yeah. Yes, and then Paul behind you, yeah.
I just
Sure.
recently read back to the midwives situation. This just didn't stop overnight, that they, you know,
Right.
son, because the Pharaoh and the Egyptians had this belief in the Nile god, And the crocodiles were the servants of that god. So they did child sacrifice and they went boys that they found, the son, the babies, and used the Israelite babies to feed to the crocodiles.
Yeah, I guess,
So 80 years.
yeah, yeah.
And so it wasn't like, hey, that, the edict.
Yeah. That puts the whole concept of putting him in the ark in a basket even more interesting. Paul and then Gloria.
Rebel, if it was like, Jerusalem was during the Roman occupation,
Yeah,
and there were soldiers intermixing with them all the time.
Yeah.
They had taskmasters.
yeah,
I'm assuming that he just didn't have the taskmasters go to and then have his army set up.
right, that they enforced this forced labor with
Yeah.
a lot of power. Yeah, okay, Gloria.
Well, it's kind of interesting. He's killing the boys. I mean, wasn't it the mission? Doing so the labor for him, he would want the boys to. He would want lots of boys born to
Yeah.
bring up his.
I didn't think about that side of it. I guess he had enough men for. They could make bricks as well. All right. These are important, good questions to ponder. What is the text telling us? What does the text want us to know? There were. That's where we're going, right? That's right. That's the next part of the story, which we're gonna get into right now. Thank you, Ally. So what the text wants us to know, the Pharaoh is threatened, the Pharaoh is murdering, wants to murder Hebrew boys. He's enslaving the people. They are being oppressed. While they're being oppressed, they are multiplying. The Pharaoh is losing the battle. He goes to Hebrew midwives and commands them to do something, and they stand up to the mighty Pharaoh.
I mean,
That, yes, it is. It's extremely important. And it's, to me, makes me think about standing up for my convictions. When I look at any hero, but especially these two midwives that we hear about, they should be on our list of heroes of the faith, because they stood up to the Pharaoh and they stood up for life. And they were crafty about it too. They were smart. They were.
why?
It was very wise. They were also wise. Very great word for them. So, yeah,
They
please.
gave it, they were wise and they gave an excuse that he couldn't, well, yeah.
Yeah, like, what's he gonna say, you know? How could he argue with that?
How do you?
And then, so he says, all right, female children is fair game, Egyptians that are Hebrews. Yeah, thank you. Carrie made the connection of Herod's being threatened about Jesus's birth. And he has all the male children of Bethlehem up to 2 years old be killed or slaughtered. Yes, yeah, so. And where did, thank you, Carrie, perfect. Where did Joseph take Jesus? To flee to Egypt. And it's partly because in the Old Testament, we hear a messianic prophecy that out of Egypt, will come my Messiah or my son. And so Matthew wants us to see, he tells us about that, Matthew does, he wants us to see that, hey, there it is, something's being fulfilled. But isn't that ironic that that's where they flee to? Yeah, out of Egypt, yeah, that comes my son. So Jesus fled, Joseph took Jesus and Mary to Egypt to hide out until Herod died, and then came back to Nazareth. But so out of Egypt comes my son. So, but no, you think about Herod the Great, suppose, as you would call him, because he's this great builder, he did the same thing that the Pharaoh did. Now, in Bethlehem, there was probably about 200 people in Jesus's day, so how many boys would that be? Dozen? I don't know.
Many.
6? You know, but enough, it doesn't matter, it's a horrible thing, so. All right. Let's move on to the next part here. Now, a man from the house of Levi went and took his wife, a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him 3 months.
He did that.
So you gotta hide your kid because he could be swept away at any time. When she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes, papyrus reeds in the Hebrew, and daubed it with bitumen and pitch. All right, let's go to this word basket. Exactly, in fact, I'm just gonna open it up so that we can look at it. Yes, so we're gonna seal it, so it's a little boat. But you should know, it's the word for ark in Hebrew. Now, it was a basket, I mean, so it's the correct translation, but don't miss that this is the same word that, you know, when Noah got everybody in, it was a much bigger ark. It was a different ark, but it's the same word.
It's the savings.
Yes, yeah. And then what do we call the box that the commandments and the covenants put in? The ark of the covenant, exactly. There's some problems with looking at the church this way, as an ark. But there's also some blessings about it. In the old school of a church, by the way, I know it's getting even colder in here. I think Lisa Karen, I know you shut the door because there was all kinds of talk, but I think Lisa opened that door because for some reason it was letting warm air. Do you want to just prop it back open? It might, and also I think they had something set that maybe it shuts off when the door, anyway, I'm sure she's called our heater person, but anyway, so, where was I? Oh, the church. So our church is so beautifully, you know, Northwest, I absolutely love our sanctuary, and it's put function, you know, as an important part. And one of the problems today of our older churches, they're what? Long and narrow. And that doesn't tend to work with people as well today. The folks that architect this sanctuary were very smart to make it more communal, you're more aware of other people. It's just warm anyway. But the reason they did that, what did the top of the church look like?
Top of there. Swoop a little.
Not a cross. A ship. It's the bottom of a ship. Did you not know that? Yeah, a lot of our older churches, the top of it looks like the inside. If you flipped it upside down, it would be what? An ark. And that the church is the place that takes us safely into the promised land. And so this was the reasoning and the theology. No, that's no joke. Stand by that. It was. They would do that to make it seem like it was the bottom of the boat. I'm totally.
At the same time, your construction techniques those days, they could build. Because they had it.
There's no question it had a architectural strength by doing it that way. But I'm very confident that that was a part of their thinking, is because they thought about this church as an ark. Yeah.
And then in the 60s, when they started just building them like this, it's pretty like, well, you're heretic, we can't do that.
That's right. We can't just have we gotta, this steeple thing. Yeah. So, Yeah, so Bob, I don't deny that it didn't have, structural, function. But, today, it's a real challenge for some of our churches because they're really long and narrow and you just don't feel connected. You feel back and it's just disconnected. And they tend to struggle today.
But that's where the cathedral was built.
Yeah, oh, yeah. Yeah, so, well, anyway, I didn't need to go into the whole architect thing, but when I think about the ark, a lot of people have thought about the churches and all, and I don't think it's a bad image for the church. There's some problems with it, but I mean, it is the thing, it's, when I'm baptized into Christ, I'm now in the ark. I have the covenant and it's gonna safely get me to my home, I mean, it works, yeah.
Everybody still sits in the back of the church.
I know, the boat. Yes, Ally,
Is it the same with First Christian?
it's the same as what? First Christian, you said? Are you talking about a congregation, a church? I would have to see that, it could be, congregational churches absolutely did the same thing. This was not just a Lutheran thing, yeah.
Something that impressed me so much when we came to this church.
Yeah.
Because we came from one of those long, narrow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And everybody sat way in the back.
Yeah.
There wasn't anybody up front.
Yeah, like Ross over there, yeah. Here, even when you sit in the back.
There's people, no, that's because it's more people on.
Yeah, more people are up front, but even if you sit in the back, you're not so far away. Yeah, great point. I have a joke about that, but Kathy, yeah. He wants to steer the boat. Wait a minute. Jerry, got it.
One of the, I shouldn't say a lot, but a number of the old churches in Norway, I've seen, will have boats hanging from the ceiling.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And you can see how this image would be very powerful, but yeah, the sitting in the back of the church thing is a real.
That's scripture.
Is that scripture?
Or Jesus said, "What you call it from?"
Fantastic.
Yes, yes. So, well, now I have to tell my joke, but you've heard this so many times, so some of you is like, oh, here it comes again. Yes, yeah. If I designed my congregation, it only had one, my church, it only had one pew. It'd be in the back, and then when it fills up, it would go burn. New one, Papa. I could do it the way I exactly want it. Get you guys up there. Of course, educational people like to say that there's three kinds of learners. There's auditory, visual, and kinesthetic. Say that's why not many people sit up front, because the front people, they're kinesthetic. They want to feel it. They want to be there. The people in the middle are visual because are auditory because they want to hear, but they don't want to be right up front. And then the people in the back are visual so they can see everything. I think that's a bunch of. Just kidding. All right, excellent. Well, we got a lot of work out of the basket. So made of bulrushes and daubed with pitch. So she put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the riverbank. And his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. All right, so let's make sure we got all the players. Are we told the Levite woman's name? No. But a Levite woman has her child, 3 months old, puts the baby in this ark. The sister of the Levite woman is watching. Sister of the child?
No, it's sister. It's Miriam, actually.
And his sister, it's a child's sister.
So it's the child's sister.
His
All right, okay, well, I didn't know when it said his sister, whether, yeah, I guess that would be the child's, yeah, okay. So we've got his sister who's older, obviously, watching. All right, she put, now the daughter of. Yes, this is Moses, exactly, Ally. Now, the daughter of the Pharaoh, came down to bathe at the river, while her young women walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her servant woman, and she took it. So here's the daughter of the Pharaoh, sees this child. Think she's gonna know it's a Hebrew child? I don't know. I'm assuming. And so she has compassion. I mean, what mom, what woman sees a baby, what person in my view, but anyway. So she took it, and when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. She took pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Oh, this is the daughter of the Pharaoh. So we got all this right?
Yeah.
So we got a Levite woman has a baby, the sister of the baby watches, the ark floats, the daughter of the most powerful Pharaoh finds the basket, see, oh, this is one of the Hebrew babies. Then his sister said to the Pharaoh's daughter, okay, so somehow the sister of the Levite woman, I'm sorry, the sister of the baby is able to talk to the daughter of the Pharaoh. Get this. Now this is why I think this is told from a woman's perspective. Shall I go and call a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child?
I just happen to know her.
I just. Now, you just imagine, now, I know this is told amongst the men of Israel and the Hebrew, but women and men were very much in separate communities back, biblically. Can you just imagine the women telling the story and howling?
Yeah.
Just laughing, like, because look what happens. The Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." So the girl went and called the child's mother. Oh, that's so great. That is so great. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." She just paid to nurse her own child. Oh, this is just too awesome. This is so great. This is so great. And so the woman took the child and nursed him. When the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses because she said, "I drew him out of the water." Wow, what a concise, beautiful, in one sense, humorous and yet serious, heroic story. Amazing, yes.
River Nile, huge,
Yes,
big currents. So when any woman would come down to wash themselves, they're going to be in a shallow, reed protected area so that they're not going to have to worry about hurt.
right,
And so going into the reeds protects the basket.
sure, absolutely. Gets a little safe haven there. Except for the crocodile. You say, I mean, then she made it safe, it's floating up on the surface, so the crocodiles would leave them alone.
It must have been a the Pharaoh's daughter would come to this particular area to bathe with her.
Very possibly, so they might have
I
like,
would just stick a baby there and don't know if anybody's gonna find it.
well, one. The only thing I would say is when you've got kids being killed and murdered, you're gonna do anything to save your kid, even if it means taking the gamble and putting him in a basket and putting. Better that than having the kid ripped from your arms, and we've seen historically, I mean, Vietnam parents pushing their kids into
Yeah.
helicopters and, all, even in Afghanistan and all of these sad stories. Well, this is the desperation of a mother, but maybe she was also smart and knew where the current was going, absolutely.
Sister was there.
And then just so happens the sister is able to talk to the daughter of the Pharaoh.
The sister was there.
Right. Now, is this the daughter or the wife of the Pharaoh? Right, so the Pharaoh's daughter has Moses as her son now. Okay, got it. Sorry, I just have to, I've read this a million times, so I just want to make sure I don't get confused.
Remember the Pharaoh,
Yes, exactly. Did I see miss a hand out there? Yes, Kathy, and then over here. Yeah,
There's some study notes here. It says, Moses sounds like the Hebrew for draw out. But in the Egyptian, it means
is born, okay.
Yeah, so kind of interesting.
Yes, and so even there you see some influence of the Egyptian, out of the water is born, and you can see some relationship there. Very cool, helpful. Stephanie, or
Would Pharaoh's daughter gone to the same place every day to take a bath?
Yeah.
And that's, that was their ritual, everybody.
so they were strategic, and they took a gamble that the Pharaoh's daughter wouldn't just, it's a Hebrew child. But the Pharaoh's daughter, but again, do we hear anything about God in this story yet?
It's God's doing.
There you go, it's God's doing, Roberta. God is in the background.
And the Hebrew woman was God-fearing.
And the Hebrew women were God-fearing. And that's where you see God at work through the midwives and through, the Pharaoh's daughter. Taking and then bringing up this child as her own. So mom got to nurse her own child and be paid for it. I mean, I'm sorry, men would not tell this story. They wouldn't think about how cool that is. But anyway, it's fine. Yeah. Yeah.
Get noticed so much up through the ranks. If it was the wife.
Oh, yeah, no go. That would have been no go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if she was a teenager.
Yeah. Okay, Kathy, please.
I just wondered how Pharaoh was thinking when his daughter tells him she has a kid.
Would that be under his radar? He's got all these wives and. Yeah, more than one daughter, certainly, but again, this is, I'm glad we're asking these questions because it assumes the historicity, the happenedness of this event. It happened. But now there's a lot of details that we're not told. Well, I did a certain, a little different, but no, but there's lots of details as we read through Genesis and as now we read through Exodus. There's going to be lots of things we're going to be like, you should have told us. But that's so, and that's fine. It's fun to wonder about these things, but then we focus on, well, what does the text want us to know? The text wants us to know God is for life. God is going to work salvation for his people, and look at how he's doing it through midwives, through a basket, through the Pharaoh's daughter. What a God. All right. So that's our first day with Exodus. Thank you. Great work. We are right there ready to launch into Moses fleeing from Egypt. We're going to grow up just like Jesus, he's born, goes to the temple once, and he's 30 years old. Now Moses is going to be grown up next time we get together. Thanks, everybody. Stop the share here. Hey, Margot, you need to get in there, and then I give you a chance. Good to see you. Happy New Year.
You too.
True. There it is. It started right. But that's every year ago. Yep.
Second.